cocktail party full of fellow psychologists and had been bored stiff. This would never happen at ISSID, but it's possible. Have you ever had a tutorial group of sullen, silent students who think a tutorial is a Quakers meeting and won't talk until the spirit moves? Well, I have a solution. You ask them this question: who, in your view, is the world's greatest living psychologist? You can hop the question up. You can say, who is, in your view, the world's greatest living American psychologist? The world's greatest living woman psychologist? The world's greatest living German psychologist? The answers I will want, by the way, to this as a dinner. I want you to contemplate this question. It's a good question. But if you meet an obsessional, and I'm on the other end of the scale, more impulsive, what they want to know is, what is the criteria? And I say, well, it's your criteria, not my criteria. You can nominate the person by your criteria. But I have criteria for a great psychologist. The one you will all agree with, of course, is Big G. Full on, high power, really smart, clever, cognitive ability. You don't get anywhere with a lot of that stuff, and we know that because we've heard many papers on it. What else? Well, you need to be widely read. You need curiosity. You need, as Sophie von Stumm called this morning, a hungry mind. People who read widely and widely outside the discipline and within it. And the great psychologists I've known who had those characteristics. Third, you need courage. You need courage to speak the truth, to go against the trend, to withstand rejection, and to be iconoclastic at times, when you know it to be the right thing to do. You need to move on and keep up, not be caught by your models and your metaphors and your technology of a past era. And the other characteristic I've noticed with great psychologists is generosity. Generosity with their time, generosity with their ideas, and generosity with their other assets. Well, our speaker today has all those characteristics, but he has others beside. I think Bob has two other characteristics you will notice very definitely. If you don't know what it means to cut the Gordian knot, you will see it done again and again by Bob Hogan. It says in Wikipedia, bold strokes to solve intractable problems. Bob always says there's three important things about something or the other. There's four things you need to know. You think, what? And then you listen to him, and my God, he has cut the Gordian knot. Nobody cuts Gordian knots like Bob Hogan. And there's one other characteristic which makes him very different. Put up your hands in this room if you have founded and run a successful multinational company. I know very few psychologists who do that. Those of us who write and consult and talk about things like leadership, Bob would call us troubadours. Others might call us something less complimentary. But when he talks about business and related issues, which he's going to talk about today, this is not somebody who sits in a dry library reading the Journal of Applied Psychology. He's there and he does it. So he does know what he's talking about, not from the dry academic point of view, but from real practice. So we're in for a treat this afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We have one of the rarest psychologists around at the moment, who knows the literature very well, who is academic, who brings out papers on a regular basis that are always innovative, always entertaining, always important. And I think you'll see all these characteristics this afternoon. So I invite you to listen to Professor Bob Hogan.
Thanks for that sparkling introduction. I appreciate it. And thanks also to the organizing committee for inviting me to come by. And thanks to you folks for showing up this afternoon. For the last year and a half or so, I've been studying the topic of employability because I think it's really interesting. And it really is interesting. And recently, Tomas Shamor-Peruzic and I have sent a paper to the American Psychologist on employability. And what this talk is basically the cliff notes from that paper, because there's a lot of stuff in the paper. First question is, who cares? And the answer is, employability is a serious public policy issue in the United States, and I imagine it is in France and England. The official unemployment rate in the U.S. is 9.2%. It's got to be way higher than that. That's government doctoring the numbers to make it look better than it actually is. The unemployment rate for returning U.S. veterans is 20%. We actually, I'm pretty sure, don't want them to come back real soon for precisely that. And the unemployment rate for the spouses of U.S. veterans is 30%. And we have an unemployment crisis in the U.S. How's the job market for your graduate students? Lifetime employment, and everyone says these days now, lifetime employment in the same organization is no longer possible or even expected for most people. That is, it's just the way it goes is people are going to have to be constantly reinventing themselves in terms of the occupational cycle. And so I think these data highlight the social significance of employability. It's a serious problem, and it's going to engage all of us sooner or later. But for me, I think with the old joke that psychologists always study their problems, that's sort of true. That's why I did my dissertation on morality. But this employability thing is personal. I had a roommate in college for 3 years who was the most perplexing guy. He was really bright. He was as smart as anybody in this room in terms of his SAT scores. And he was witty, he was funny, he was articulate, he has a brilliant sense of humor. But he's also lazy, spoiled, entitled, and neurotic. And I always wondered, he was his mama's boy. He never had to do anything he didn't want to do. He was a germ-phobic guy. I always wondered, I mean, we're just kids, you know, you're 19. I always wondered how I'd be able to keep a job. And the answer is he couldn't. He worked off and on for about 13 years after he got out of the Army, 13 years, off and on. And then that was it. I think he's been unemployed since he was in his mid-40s. And he can't get a job. I mean, he just can't. And he said, and there are lots of people just like him. Everyone in my, say in my notes here, everyone in my family is smart in terms of test scores, well-educated, and unemployable. Just unemployable. My cousin Terry has a PhD in economics from Berkeley. He was on the faculty at Northwestern for 2 years, and he walked away. He lives in a shack in the mountains outside of Santa Fe. I don't know what he does. I mean, he looks like a bagman. And that's what he's done since he was about 35. And then how many students, really smart students, have you met over the years who couldn't get or keep a job? So there's a whole bunch of these people out there, and nobody talks about it. They're the outliers, which is where the interesting stuff comes. So employability is obviously about a good deal more than IQ and education. Here's another interesting little fact that no one talks about. About 40% of the U.S. population, adult population, say they do not want to work for anyone else, as in we don't want to work for anyone else. In my family, it was considered a disgrace. If you worked for someone else, you'd lost. In my wife's family, it's the same thing. You work for somebody else, you're just a loser. What's the matter with you? Can't you support yourself? So the research using IQ to predict occupational performance is based on people who do want to work for someone else. And that's a whole different kettle of fish. Is this a biased sample? Of course it is. Absolutely it's a biased sample. That sample doesn't include my former roommate, it doesn't include my cousin Terry, and it doesn't include my ex-wife. All of them were really smart and unemployable. So I wonder what all this means for the study of careers. And I think I know what it means. So, how do you define employability? There are 3 functional components. First is the ability to gain employment. And that means having something that employers want. I mean, they don't hire you because you're beautiful. They hire you because you can do something for them that they actually think they need. And then it's the ability to keep the employment once you've got the job, and that means keeping your boss happy. And 1 and 2 are not the same. Getting hired and retaining a job are different processes. And then the ability to gain new employment if you're not very good at number 2, which is keeping your boss happy. And note that the process of getting hired and the process of keeping your boss happy, it's all about other people's perceptions of you. It's not about your innate benevolent qualities. It's how they react to what you bring to the table. So your fate, your employment fate, is controlled by those folks, not by yourself. So what do employers want in, this right? Yep. What do employers want in job applicants? Psychologists say employers want cognitive ability. Department of Labor scans report, it was called Workforce 2000, the Reagan administration put it together. They interviewed labor leaders and big CEOs and so forth to say, what does the workforce of the future going to look like? This was it was a pretty good study. And they came up with these 5 themes: allocating resources, displaying interpersonal skills, acquiring and using information, understanding complex relationships, and working with technologies. Well, 1, 3, 4, and 5 clearly involve some cognitive component, but what's interesting is the Department of Labor is the people who funded Schmidt and Hunter. That they are seriously into cognitive ability, and the fact that they would even mention interpersonal skills was a genuine shock to my wife and me, and quite interesting. So, what do real employers say they want? That was a Department of Labor survey. They talked to their pals. What do real employers say they want? My wife subscribed to the major newspaper from the 9 U.S. Census regions in the country, so it'd be Denver, Dallas, Seattle, Miami, New York, Kansas City, Chicago. So 9, and she subscribed to them for 6 months, and she clipped every employment ad in every one of those papers for 6 months, which led to 6,326 ads, and then she content analyzed them to see what employers said they wanted in employees. This is not making this up. This is what real employers who pay their money to recruit people say they want from employees. 71% of the jobs, they want interpersonal skills were essential for 71% of the jobs with customer contact, 83% of the jobs involving subordinate interaction, what job doesn't, and 78% of jobs involving coworker interaction. From the employer's perspective, the most important characteristic in impacting employability is interpersonal skill. Employers are doing the hiring, not the Department of Labor. Employers are doing the hiring, not John Hunter and Frank Schmidt. So that's what they say they want, and there it is. So what is it? I mean, what is interpersonal skill? My wife is actually the best researcher that I know. She's really quite good. She gathered 300 critical incidents of positive interpersonal performance at work, and 300 incidents of from real employee adults who were working, and then 300 incidents of negative. And then she did this whole big old content analysis, and what she found was one great big super factor. She called it sensitivity to others, which included those 4 characteristics: being able to understand other people's intentions, anticipating other people's needs, respecting other people's wishes and project. It's the absolute antithesis of egocentrism is what you have here. This is being sensitive to, perceptive about, engaged in the world out there, as opposed to being wrapped up in your own neurotic fantasies. So, interpersonal skill concerns being, this is the line, interpersonal skill concerns being rewarding to deal with. And the genius Michael Argyle said that back in the 60s, didn't he? And it's true, and it's as good a definition as you can possibly find. Being rewarding to deal with. Okay, this is for the young people in the room, most of whom will be very poorly trained in personality psychology. I know that, because I used to be in that business. Most people, and including the young people in this room, will equate personality theory with trait theory. But it's not the same. It's just, you get that particularly here in the UK because of ISSID and Cattell. Trait theory is an intrapersonal model where everything important in life happens inside your head. And then these things happen in there, the traits get activated in some way, they glow or they separate or and then you do things. So, you know, all behavior starts somewhere in the hypothalamus and away you go. I'm a big fan of interpersonal theory as a contrast. These are very different strains of different models of personality. Intrapsychic theory is everything's inside here. Interpersonal theory, everything that's important in life happens between people. And then what happens between people gets registered up here so that everything up here started out there. Everything in your head started in public and then became private. And then that subsequently interacts with you, how you behave and the like. So I'm a big fan of interpersonal skill, or interpersonal theory. Everything important happens in social interaction. And this is Dunbar's social brain hypothesis. You've got a great big brain because of all this social interaction that you have to keep track of. So what I think is important in life is precisely that. It's very interesting, by the way, the principal advocates of intrapsychic theory are all continental Europeans. The principal advocates of interpersonal theory are all Celtics. They're all Scots and Irish, and a few English. It's really quite distinct. I mean, you could just pull them apart. They just come from different places on Earth. Adam Smith would have been the first interpersonal theorist. So interpersonal skill is the G factor in social. George Herbert Mead said that. That was his major intellectual claim. Interpersonal skill is the G factor in social interaction, and interpersonal skill enables effective self-presentational behavior. As in, what's going on in life, you're not behaving, you're self-presenting. And other people are keeping score. So, Employability must depend on some kind of competencies that can be assessed and possibly trained. The most influential paper, so this is me doing my literature review in public, the most influential paper probably on this whole subject of employability competence is this paper by this guy Hogan, who's at a business school in Dallas. And it's a very, I mean, if you go into the employability business, you will have to deal with his paper because it's just there as the starting block. And it's a useful starting point. He doesn't have any data, he just talks about it. There's a woman at University of California, Davis, named Vicki Smith. She's a sociologist, has a marvelous paper reviewing the whole literature on employability. She argues, it's one of the best papers I read, that the key competency driving employability is appropriate self-presentational skills. And these employability clinics where you've been fired, you go to this workshop to learn how to be employable, it's all about teaching you how to behave yourself during an interview. And yeah. So the empirical literature on this topic is really quite limited. This is a hot topic for folks who want to start on something new. And below, these are the two best empirical papers that I found. First one was by the indefatigable Tim Judge and his friends Boudreaux and Boswell, where people, job seekers, came to an employment agency and were interviewed and then referred subsequently to a job, and they were given ratings for employability during their interview at the agency. Those ratings for employability during that interview were the best single predictors of actual salary level and performance on the job subsequently. So ratings of how employable you seem at the hiring agency predict your performance on the job with an entirely different set of conditions. That's a really important finding. And then a second, there's a really good paper by two lady psychologists from Amsterdam with Dutch names. They had a sample of, it was 350 mid-managers in a large Dutch manufacturing organization, and they constructed a battery of tests that they thought would measure the relevant, back to that guy Hogan, the relevant competencies associated with employability. Well, so they had 5 different scales. One of the scales was called corporate savvy. And they gave the items in the paper, and their measure of corporate savvy was just a measure of social desirability, of behaving in a way that was socially appropriate. And that scale was the best predictor in their entire study, and it was really good stuff. It was retention, salaries, promotions, correlation with promotions, 0.47. It's a really good paper, just really driving home the case that what these guys were rating during an interview turns out to be, so as I say here, employability, social desirability, self-presentational behavior are all related in some way. Now, what about people who are just out looking for work? There are a couple of papers, not much, but a couple of papers, and they pretty much show the same thing. Adjustment predicts, it scores on a measure of adjustment, that factor, emotional stability factor on the 5-factor, predicts energetic job-seeking behavior on the part of unemployed workers in U.S. guys, and then among Germans, it's a combination of conscientiousness and adjustment. So adjustment, conscientiousness, and we're starting to, I think, we see a syndrome here. Adjustment, conscientiousness, social desirability, appropriate self-presentational behavior, and employability all come together in some kind of okay. Now what about, so now you got the job, what do you do after you got the job? 2 really good review papers. I love this paper by Brent Roberts, which was quite unique at the time. It makes the case, very careful analyses shows that IQ and personality predict income, occupational prestige, long-term unemployment in the reverse direction, and occupational stability. So it's personality and IQ, and it's pretty much that syndrome that I was talking about. And then this guy Kunsel seems to be everywhere. And this is a really good review paper, the 2010. Same thing, just kind of a magisterial overview. Personality and IQ substantially predict career and life success. Now, you may not think that's news, but 10 years ago, that would have been heresy. But I think it's now basically a kind of an empirical fait accompli. Personality and IQ predict career success. And the same variables that predict educational performance predict job performance. And that's pretty interesting. And why might that be? So anyway, as I say, the last note here, IQ, personality, academic performance, and career success all form some kind of a positive manifold. And what's that all about? And this is me just sort of summarizing that stuff again. What does it mean? I think there are 4 answers. First answer is the criterion data in educational and employment research are usually contaminated by politics. Just straightforward office politics. Grades, hiring decisions, and performance appraisals are surprisingly subjective. High performers, good students, good employees are necessarily successful political actors who also perform at least satisfactorily. And I have probably done personally 100 validity studies. I'm the guy who does the research that other people use for their meta-analyses. I actually did the numbers. You go to the organization, you test a bunch of people in a particular job category, you develop some kind of criterion data, and then you run the numbers. And I've done that. I did that for years, we have something like 350 of those studies in our archives, and I'm sure I personally did at least 100 of them. And what we saw over and over and over again, it was like a law. Supervisors did not know who was doing a good job for them. They just knew who they liked. Full stop. My favorite study, and it's really quite dramatic, I mean, from my point of view, it was a trucking company, it was a nationwide trucking company. They had a sample, they had something like 300, 350 sales guys in the organization. Each sales guy had his performance rated by the terminal manager, this trucking company, terminal manager out of which he worked, his regional sales supervisor, and the national sales supervisor. So each guy got a rating for that. The ratings correlated, the reliability of the ratings was above 0.7, so they were all agreeing that he was good and he wasn't. And then we ran the numbers, and it turned out that those ratings for performance were uncorrelated, zero, with the amount of revenue they generated as a sales guy. The best predictor of those ratings was the degree to which they turned in their paperwork successfully. But that was the whole damn company. This was the 7th largest trucking company in the United States. And what drives the business? Sales guys. And what were sales guys getting rated on? How well they did their paperwork. But that's the way it goes in life. So, good grades in school depend entirely on telling the teachers what they want to hear. Even when you know it's not true, you have to tell them what they want to hear, right? The reviews of this talk today are going to depend precisely on me telling you what you want to hear. So, recruiting firms' ratings of employability during an interview predict subsequent job performance on their performance on the job. Hiring manager, that means hiring managers, people who are doing the hiring, and the operational managers are responding to the same aspects of the employee's behavior because they both work. By definition, this is something other than pure job performance. In fact, there's some data to show that job performance is almost uncorrelated with success. It just doesn't matter how good a job you do, it's whether or not they like you. Biases in the selection process overlap with biases in the job performance ratings because HALO is valid variance. And that's where I was headed with that. The only competent study of employability so far, that was by those 2 Dutch ladies, shows that behaving in a socially desirable way during the job interview and on the job predicts every outcome of significance. So this is, I'm sorry, that's the theme. So the ability to put on a socially desirable performance is absolutely crucial for career success. Full stop. But social desirability is valid variance. The only objective way to talk about social desirability is with assessment procedures. And as Del Paulus has shown us, there are 2 dimensions running through social desirability. There's an unconscious dimension and there's a conscious dimension. The unconscious dimension is items like, I have a great sense of humor. That's an item on one of my inventories. If I gave that to you, 99.9% of the people in the room here would say yes. And as you say, you would say, yes, I have a good sense of humor. You don't. About 10% of you have a good sense of humor. 10% of you have no sense of humor. And the rest are in the middle somewhere. So when you say, as you will, yes to the statement, I have a good sense of humor, are you lying? No. You're just executing an unconscious move in the direction of social desirability. Then the second kind of, it's called impression management. These are more overt items, as in, I've never let a fart. And people can kind of tell up front what the right answer there is. And so those are more susceptible to conscious manipulation. But nonetheless, this is a really robust meta-analysis of correlation between social desirability, impression management, and the 5-factor model. And having both scores, having high scores on either one of those scales is associated with being rewarding to deal with. You're just rewarding for different reasons. People with high scores on social desirability are predictable and approachable. People with high scores on impression management engage in a lot of ingratiation. That's the the correlation with agreeableness. So high scores on social desirability is going to predict job performance, and it's a syndrome. It's not faking. So, how do you seem socially desirable? Bosses and teachers like employees and students who seem smart, compliant, and rewarding to deal with. And I think this is why IQ predicts job performance the way it does, is that people like dealing with smart employees, as they just learn quicker and they're more fun to be around. So social desirability is about seeming smart, seeming compliant, willing to do what you're told, and being interpersonally sensitive, that is to say, being rewarding to deal with. And that's the whole package. And you say, well, that's, you know, that's acting. No, here we go again. What does it mean to be yourself? The whole socialization process is about teaching children to fake. 100%. The real you, Freud would say, and I completely agree, the real you is something to be ashamed of. It's supposed to outgrow that. So, once again, social desirability is valid performance variance. So who's unemployable? Well, it's just the reverse, it's the obverse. Unemployability is composed of the same 3 dimensions or elements. Seeming to make poor decisions, that's seeming not smart. Seeming rebellious, disobedient, and disputatious, that is seeming non-conforming, and then seeming irritable, rude, and socially insensitive, that is being not rewarding to deal with, which would be my roommate, who was very unrewarding to deal with. And it would be my cousin Terry, too. So employability can be thought of as an attribution with 3 components. The first attribution is, that's a fun person to be around, I enjoy that person's company. Fitting in with the corporate culture and being able to get something done. Let me say a word about items 2 and 3. Fitting in with the corporate culture, we have a lot of data on this. It doesn't matter how talented you are, if your values are inconsistent with the values of the larger culture, you're toast. You're done. When I'm a retired naval officer. When I got my commission, I had a telegram from the Secretary of the Navy saying this is one of the hottest young officers in the Navy, full stop. And I was a real hardworking guy and I wanted to do a good job, and I reported aboard ship, and I'm a liberal, I'm just an unreconstructed liberal. And I believe in civil rights and social justice. And the Navy is an authoritarian hierarchy. It's just a terrible place, and they just couldn't stand me, and I couldn't stand them. And I mean, I'm right with the best credentials you can possibly imagine, and I would have to say my Navy career was a failure. I mean, I did a really good job. I did really well at everything I did, but they just hated me because I wasn't one of them. So, and that's true for you all too. I mean, and we have data from this in lots of different organizations that if your values are inconsistent with the culture, you're just done. You will turn over fairly rapidly. And then finally, being able to get something done. This is my hobby horse. It's really, you can just see this. You go to, I fly a lot. You fly a lot. There are people who can get on a plane and sit down. And then there are people who get on a plane and they're in the aisle there for 10, 15, 20 minutes, diddling around. And it's just astounding. And it's the same people. And you can tell, or when you go through the security line at the airport, you can just, don't get behind that guy because you know what's coming. And the people in a supermarket, you don't want to get behind them because if they get up, they can't buy their groceries. They just can't get it done. They can't find their wallet. They can't. So there are huge individual differences in people's ability to get something done. There are people who are really effective. Adrian just cranks it out. I mean, they just effortlessly stuff comes out, and other people it's just permanent blockage. So. Being rewarding to deal with, fitting with the corporate culture, and being able, and so as I say here, you've got many very smart people are abrasive misfits who work according to their own schedule, which includes all of my relatives, which is why they're unemployable. This is our little graphic. This is actually a pretty cool graphic. So who's employable? Over on the left, people who are rewarding to deal with, that's getting the job. And then here in the middle, people who get stuff done and people who fit in, that's keeping the job. So getting the job, keeping the job, and then people who are rewarding to deal with. There's a law that nobody knows about except me. I have my own private laws. There's only one way to be rewarding. There's lots of ways to be disagreeable. And that's what the dark side down there is all about. That's a whole taxonomy of ways in which people can be disagreeable. So that's getting along, okay, defined in terms of not being able to get along. So there's that whole dark side thing. And then being able to get stuff done, that's a combination of bright side. We talk about the dark side and the bright side of personality. Dark side is the stuff that gets you in trouble. The bright side is the stuff that advances your career. So positive features, and then people who are confident, that's going to be a mixture of cognitive ability and drive. And then over here, people who fit in, share organizational values, personal organization. So anyway, so personality, cognitive ability, and values. And there's all kinds of implications here for individual differences research if you're interested in applications. So there's how do people derail? That's, I mean, no one talks about it. It's a really interesting topic. Bright side and getting ahead, that's actually a fair amount of, but the competency thing, who can get things done? It's going to be more than IQ. It's going to be, I think we have some data on it. It's IQ, it's ambition, and it's low, and it's good adjustment. And then the whole person value set. There's all kinds of research implicit in that model. Last thoughts. Oh, I don't want to say that. Effective performance. Effective performance is about syndromes. It's not about individual traits. You start saying effective performance is a function of conscientiousness. No. It's going to be a personality style. It's going to be basically a regression equation, not individual traits. And people need to have that. Syndromes can always be decomposed into traits, but you can't put it back the other way. You can't take the traits and say that'll make this syndrome. It's the problem of emergence in biology. So that first point, it's about syndromes, it's not about single traits. When you start talking about single traits, you start sounding simple-minded. Employability is being rewarding to deal with, being productive, and fitting in. It's the combination of personality, GM, and values, and that's it, that's what it is. And then finally, the literature, I'm serious about this, the literature on IQ and job performance is based on people who want to work for someone else. And that's a biased sample, and that's a problem with that whole literature. So, last point. This is really, I think this is really interesting. You guys remember Thomas Malthus, right? Who argued that human populations, and it's true for shrimps and guppies and swallows and everything, populations always expand past the carrying capacity, the food supply that's available to them where they live. And so Malthus said the human history will just be one famine after another over time as populations grow and then collapse because there's not enough food. Well, the claim is there's been this agricultural or green revolution, so we now have enough food to go around. But economists, a fundamental assumption of economics is that economies are infinitely expandable, and nothing can be infinitely expandable. And it could very well be with regard to employability. I mean, there's hardcore unemployability in the U.S. documented for the last 20 years. This is not a new phenomenon. It could be that the economy has just reached a saturation point past which parts of the U.S. economy are absolutely booming. Corporate real estate is going through the roof. So there's parts of the economy that are beautiful. There's this huge mass of unemployed. What's that all about? It may be that we've reached the carrying capacity of the modern economy. And then say, remember the French Revolution. I only recently figured out what happened with the French Revolution. In the middle of the 18th century, there were increases in agriculture and in public hygiene that caused a population surge. So that in the late 1700s, huge masses of unemployed men from the countryside moved to Paris and moved to London. Well, the guys who moved to Paris, who do they find living in Paris with them? The pissed off soldiers from the French army. The officers are living out in Versailles, the soldiers are living in town. So you got these unemployed, disgruntled guys, plus an angry group of guys with guns, and boom, you got a French Revolution. So why did that not happen in London? Because the powers that be in England figured out that there was a war coming with France, and we can take all these pissed off unemployed young men and send them to fight in France. Which is historically, I'm serious, historically that's the way people dealt with these things. And then Napoleon said, oh yeah, I got all these angry young men, I can send them to war in Russia. Or, that's how, so, we may be in a new economic phase would be my final point. And I think that's it, and thank you for your attention.